Okay, good morning. Today we're going to begin with the introduction of our sermon called Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. So we're going to talk a bit about the background of this sermon, and also we're going to talk a bit about the author of the sermon, Jonathan Edwards. Okay, so basically you should be on page 85. Go to page 85. So we have Plymouth Plantation is done. Now we're going to go with Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. And then we're going to wrap up with To My Dear Beloved Husband. That will be our third one, okay? But today we're going to do Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. Our author is Jonathan Edwards. This guy is going to learn 3 languages before the age of 12. Those 3 languages are Latin, Greek, and Hebrew. Latin, Greek, and Hebrew. Okay? He learned 3 languages before the age of 12. He learned Latin, Greek, and Hebrew. This guy entered the University of Yale at the age of 13. 13, yes, it was possible, he did. 13, and very important, the University of Yale is located in Connecticut, okay? Yale is located in Connecticut.
He went to Yale at what age?
13. Very important. When he graduated 4 years later. So, if he entered when he was 13, he graduated with 17. 17 years old, he already graduated from the University of Yale, and he graduated as a valedictorian. Anyone knows what is a valedictorian?
Like honor and
Valedictorian, you're close. Valedictorian is the highest point average of his class. So he has the best average with 17 years old. Jonathan Edwards. So a valedictorian is, for example, you guys are graduating in 2 years. So in your graduation, you're going to have a valedictorian and a salutatorian. The valedictorian is the highest average, and the salutatorian is the second highest average. Okay? It is supposed, like some schools do it, some schools they don't. Like the first message in graduation is given by the salutatorian. Salute, of just giving like the first message, salutatorian. And the last message is given by the valedictorian. That a lot of schools like don't do it and they omit those speeches. It depends on the school. That some schools they don't give the awards for the valedictorian and the salutatorian. Well, those are some schools. In our case, we do. For example, in our school, we do give award for the valedictorian and the salutatorian for our senior class. Okay. Now, this guy is going to give a sermon. This is not a play. This is not a story. This is not a poem. This is not a myth like the Native Americans. This is a sermon. And I'm going to define real quick what is a sermon. A sermon is a special speech designed to persuade. A sermon is a famous speech or an important speech intended to persuade. Okay? That's the goal of a sermon.
A famous speech
Intended to persuade. What is persuasion?
Like to convince.
Persuasion is you're gonna convince. So in this sermon, this guy's gonna try to challenge and inspire. Okay? Opinions and views of a lot of people. Yeah.
Authorize.
Sermon, like sermon. S-E-R-M-O-N. Bless you. Got it? This guy is going to deliver this sermon in 6 hours. So this guy is going to stand up. He's going to stand up in that podium. And he's going to talk without stopping for 6 hours. However, this guy is not going to be like me, that I'm having eye contact with you guys and I'm looking at you, talking at you. This guy is going to look at a bell rope. You know what is a bell rope? You have the bell and you have like that rope, and you like ring the bell with that rope. That rope is going to be hanging at the end of the auditorium when he talks. And he's going to be talking, looking directly at that rope for 6 hours. He's not going to do eye contact with the rest of the people. Okay? He's just talking. I imagine that he wrote it down. Well, he wrote it down. So he's just, well, remember, this guy entered university with what? 13 years old. This guy's pretty smart. So he wrote it. So he's just giving the sermon without reading, directly there. Okay? Very important. A lot of people scream in fear in the auditorium, and he had to stop to ask for silence so he could continue. Okay? Very important that. Yes.
Why were they screaming fear?
Inside, like in there. Remember that, and when we read, you're gonna know the perspective of God in this sermon is different from the perspective that we know. The God that we're gonna know in this sermon is a God to be feared, a God that will punish you, a God that is full of hate. That's the God that Jonathan Edwards is portraying in this sermon. Okay. Very important. You don't have no atheists here. Everyone that is inside that auditorium, they believe in some way in God. Okay? Now, this sermon, yes. But no, we're not going to read the 6 hours. That's a portion. That's why it tells you from. Because it's just a fragment. Okay. Now, everyone here is going to believe in God. And this sermon is a religious sermon. Okay? It's a religious sermon. This guy is going to be very influential in a movement that is called the Great Awakening. The Great Awakening. And the Great Awakening is a movement when people are starting to go away from the church. And they're not going to church. And they're going away. He does this sermon to try to get people back to the church. And back to believing in God. Because there was a lot of people that were doubting and that were just going away. So this Great Awakening was a wake-up call. But you know what? We have a God that is going to punish you. And since they were so fearful, they started believing again. They started to come back to church. Okay? That's the Great Awakening. That's a summary of the Great Awakening. You're going to see something differently nowadays. In the 20th century, we had a famous person called Martin Luther King during the civil rights movement of the 1950s. This guy, believe it or not, had a PhD, a doctor's degree in theology. Okay? He was a preacher, Martin Luther King. The way that he delivered his speeches to the people, the way he persuaded the people, totally different from the way that Jonathan Edwards did it. Totally different. It's not the same. It's just opposite. That's how our generation and our population has changed throughout the years. Big time. Okay? Also, theology also. Theology. Very important. At some point in his career, Jonathan Edwards is going to be fired. They're going to kick him out of that congregation. Why? Because he started to apply something called orthodoxy. Write it down. Orthodoxy. 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 Okay? So, at some point, Jonathan Edwards, with this orthodoxy, he wanted it. Remember that these people left England for what reason? Religious, right? There was a lot of things in religion that these people didn't like. However, Jonathan Edwards, since he already has the control of people and he's a good speaker and he gets the attention, hey, to get the attention of people for 6 hours, you have to be good. Exactly, no eye contact, but he should be good. So, once he had the congregation, he said, you know what? We're going to start to go back to what we had in England. So when people started to see that he was having that point of view or that mindset, that's why he was kicked out of the church. Okay? Then Jonathan Edwards went to Massachusetts and he continued to be a preacher, but in this case he was preaching for the Native Americans in Massachusetts. Okay? So from Connecticut, he went to Massachusetts, okay? What is the title of our sermon? Sinners in the hands of an angry God. God is used as a personification here. Because it's giving you in the hands of an angry God. So they're giving human qualities or human attributes to God in this case, okay? In that case will be personification. Edwards, all of that is before reading, yes. Edwards and the Puritans believed tradition in two ways. Number one, they were Christian. And number two, they believed in the Calvinist view. Calvinist from John Calvin. Calvinist from a guy named John
Who believe in Calvinism?
Calvin. Edwards.
So Edward era un Calvinist.
English.
In some way he believed in that view, yes.
That again,
Jonathan Edwards believed in the view of John Calvin. Okay?
And the word Catholics
Christian, they were Christians, yeah. Now, John Calvin was born in 1509 and he died in 1564. 1509, 1564. That's Calvin. He was born 1509 and died in 1564. Very important. God is going to be presented, like I said, as a God that is to be feared, a punishing God. Okay. If we have Jonathan Edwards preaching right here, right now, you will either walk away and just leave, because the mindset of the people right now is totally different from that time. Totally different. Now, the Puritans believed in a linear view of eschatology. And eschatology is the study of what happens after you die. Plain and simple. And they had three views. Eschatology, the study of what happens after you die. Eschatology, study of what happens after you die. They got three views of that. Number one, you die, there's nothing. That's it. You die, there's nothing. Then you have a cyclical view. Sure. No question. Cyclical view is a cycle. You are born, you die, and then you reincarnate, you come back. You are born, you die, you come back. Exactly, that's a cyclical view. Born, die, and return. There's a lot of cultures that believe in reincarnation and coming back. A lot of people in our community believe that they die and probably they're going to come back either in an animal, either in another culture or whatever. It's a bunch of people around the world that believe that. Okay? But it depends on their mindset. Okay? Number one, they die, nothing happened. Number two, born, die, come back. And number three, a linear view. And that's the view of Edwards and the Puritans. Linear view. You die, and there's a punishment, and there's a judgment. And a lot of us nowadays, they have just told us and they have said that when you die, if you are sinful, if you commit a crime or whatever, you're going to be punished. You're going to go to a judgment day. Okay? So that's the view right there, the Christian view. Okay? What is the first view?
Nothing.
Die, nothing. Second,
You are born, you die, then reincarnate.
that's the cyclical. And number three, the linear. Die, and there's judgment. Two things that they're gonna tell you in this sermon. Number one, he's gonna tell the people that they're sinners, and number two, he's gonna tell the people that they're gonna go to hell.
They're scared.
When he's talking, he's gonna tell to every single person, you know what? You guys are sinners, and you guys are gonna go to hell. Those two things, and you're gonna find out as we read.
Pero
Now, there's a word you're gonna see. Remember it. Okay, wrath. That word, you're gonna see it easily more than 10 times in our sermon. Easily, more than 10 times.
Say it. Wrath.
Wrath. Wrath is vicious hate. Vicious hate, like humongous hate. And they're going to say that God, the wrath of God, the hate of God. So they're going to put God as a God that hates people. Why? Because people are sinful, they're not behaving the correct way, they're going away from the church. And by installing that fear in the people, they're going to bring that people, or try to bring that people back to the church. Okay? Wrath is vicious hate or humongous hate.
Wrath is hate.
Wrath is vicious hate. Remember, none of these people have died. It's like right now I'm talking to you guys and you're alive, you're not dead. So you guys and I, we don't know what's going to happen when we die. No one has died, has come back to say, you know what, this is what happens. So in our case, it's just superstitious. It could happen, it could not happen, depends. This sermon is never going to talk about the past. Never. This sermon is going to talk about what's going to happen in the future. If you don't behave well, you're going to go to hell. You're a sinner because you're not behaving well. And on and on. This sermon is going to be repetitive, repetitive, and repetitive. Okay? During the time of John Calvin, there's a guy. Anyone remembers 1517? In 1517, anyone remembers this? 95? I think 95 what? Very good.
Oh!
Martin Luther. This is basically connected time with John Calvin. Okay? Remember that Martin Luther in 1517, he nailed, remember that he nailed the 95 Theses in the church in Germany? Remember that? Remember right now, at that time, your supreme church was the Roman Catholic Church. After that, Protestant Reformation, right now, if you, your parents, your neighbors, your friends, your family members are part of a Protestant church, of a church that is not the Catholic Church, that's thanks to Martin Luther, 1517, and the 95 Theses. Okay? We're going to talk about that a lot when we hit Chaucer, but that's next year in your British literature.
That wasn't the Martin Luther.
We're not talking about Martin Luther King here. Martin Luther King is the Martin Luther King that we know of 1950, and Martin Luther is totally another person. Lutheran Church, very good.
From Germany.
Yeah, the monk one. Yeah, very good. Okay, so basically we're getting our feet wet and we're settled in what we're going to find in this sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. So basically that's it for an introduction. Thank you.